As a landscape photographer, I'm always chasing the light. It's not enough to have a great landscape in front of the lens. There also has to be a spectacular sunrise or sunset to take a great photo. But is this true? What if there is no magic light? Aren't there ways to still come home with some good photos, even great photos? On a recent trip to the Costa Quebrada, which is a spectacular stretch of coastline near Santander in northern Spain, I met two of the most dreaded enemies of landscape photographers: clear skies and flat grey skies. With 7 days in the area, I thought I would get at least one colorful sunrise or sunset, but cloudless skies turned into coastal fog and later thick grey skies, and the spectacular light I was waiting for never came. In this inspirational video, I want to show you 3 ways of how to deal with grey skies. 3 recipes to shoot portfolio-worthy photos under such less than ideal conditions. Because there's really no reason for resignation as long as you have some interesting landscape close by. The photos you can take in such conditions can enrich your portfolio. I would even argue they should be part of every portfolio in order to create some diversity. So let's start with the first recipe, which is to work with the darker mood that's created by cloudy skies once it gets a little darker. I especially like to shoot during blue hour after sunset or before sunrise, which is when the light gets even softer than during a cloudy day and the exposure times are naturally lengthened. My focus then is to capture some gloomy looking photos with kind of a mystic feel to it. And since the sky looks pretty much the same in every direction, I don't have to align my composition with some spectacular cloud patterns. I can fully take advantage of the scenery around me and fine-tune the composition under the grey canvas. This can be very liberating and makes it much easier to compose a shot. The only thing I make sure of when it comes to the sky is that I don't blow any highlights. Because even if the sky is looking very flat in a raw photo, structures can often be revealed by applying some heavier contrasts. Another tip I want to mention here is using a polarizer, especially if you have wet surfaces in the frame. If a grey or nearly white looking sky is reflected on those, this can be a bit distracting, and I usually use the polarizer to cancel those reflections like I did in this photo. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the look of the photo can be enhanced through turning the polarizer to maximize the reflections, which I show in the video here. You can see as the water first gets darker when I turn the polarizer and the reflections are cancelled. And then it gets brighter again as I continue to turn the polarizer. In the final photo, I turned the polarizer so the water became nearly white, which created the necessary contrast to the dark rocks in the foreground. Had I turned the polarizer to cancel those reflections, those shapes created by the water in the foreground would have been lost. The second recipe is quite obvious. In my opinion, there are no better subjects to shoot under grey skies on foggy or rainy days than forest scenes and waterfalls. Under such conditions, the light is very even. There are no hard shadows and it's again possible to create photos with more of a moody atmosphere and give those a dreamy look. With direct sun, this is usually hard to achieve because the light would create so many contrasts in an image that the amount of possible compositions would be massively reduced. Also, the colors often appear a bit washed out, whereas on a cloudy day or in the rain, the use of a polarizer will make the colors of the forest pop. So as with the first recipe, the polarizer is again essential and helps to get the most out of such a scene. Especially if you photograph waterfalls and rivers, a polarizer will help to remove distracting reflections. And there's no way to replicate this afterwards in post-processing. Now let's look at this photo I took in Spain. As rain was forecast for the day and I already had photographed some moody seascapes, I looked for a place to photograph some gnarly trees. I found the Gorbea National Park, and after 2 hours drive and a short hike I stood in this fairy tale forest. Rain and fog were perfect for this scene and helped to reduce the amount of details in the background, putting the focus even more on the main subject, this wonderful tree. The result is a photo which I could not have photographed with the sun out. So always remember to also put forests or waterfalls on your location list when you travel. If the weather gets bad, you will then have the perfect photo locations and you'll be able to take some very unique photos. With the third recipe, I want to show you a way on how to still create a colorful photo with glowing sky, even if there's no real sunrise or sunset color. I call this technique photographing false sunrises or sunsets. I simply use the artificial light of a nearby town or city, which is reflected off the gray sky in the darkness of the night. So the aim is to find an interesting scene which is close to a city. In my case, it was the coast near Playa de la Arnia, with Santander glowing in the distance. The time between roughly 90 minutes and 45 minutes before sunrise or after sunset is the sweet spot here. This is the time when the balance between the artificial orange light and the cooler natural light of the blue hour shifts. With some very long exposures, it's possible to take photos with a glowing orange sky transitioning into some cooler colors. Some essential equipment for this, besides a sturdy tripod, is a remote timer, which I use together with my camera set to bulb mode. With such a timer, I'm much more flexible in case the light changes than if I use a fixed bulb exposure, which I can set in my DSLR. I also use the long exposure noise reduction to remove hot pixels when I'm exposing for more than 4 minutes. This leaves a lot of time to lean back and enjoy nature. So I hope you enjoyed this video and it gave you some inspiration. In upcoming videos I will get a bit more technical again, and I'm also planning to share some more details on how I make sure to expose correctly when I do long exposures. But for now, I'll leave you with a few more photos which were taken under a grey sky.